Yrthya, hello. I'm so
Hello.
happy that we are connecting in this way after so many years.
So many, yeah.
I think it's been like 9 or 10 years that you participated on the panel of for the Women in Business Forum that I organized.
Right,
Remember many, many years
right.
ago. Yeah,
Many
yeah, yeah.
years ago. Yes,
Yes,
I do remember. I
yeah,
can't believe it's been that long. Oh my goodness.
yes, I know, I know. Yes, it's going by too fast. So, I, of course, read a little bit about you in your intake form. And before you will share this extremely important topic of imposter syndrome
Mhm.
and your pivotal moment, I want to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
So, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
Oh my gosh, that's such a tough question. I actually find myself in sort of almost that place of perfect happiness right now at this moment in my life. And I think it's just a great balance between the sort of where my professional career is at the moment, where my family life is at the moment, and those two things not being in conflict with each other,
Mm-hmm.
that I can be the mom I want to be, the wife I want to be, the sister, the daughter that I want to be. And I also get to do that while being the professional that I want to be. And so it's all kind of like in good harmony, which doesn't mean there aren't moments when things kind of go in sort of a little far in one direction. There's sometimes disruption, but like on average, the balance is very good every day. So I find myself very contented in this moment in time.
Very nice. What do you most value in your friends?
Uh, I say honesty and compassion. Um, I think it has to be those two things together. I want people to tell me the truth,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and to be honest with me about things. But I also want to feel like there's compassion and genuine care behind that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
honesty.
What is your most treasured possession?
Oh my God. I'm like a no possession person. Actually, I have to say, this is interesting. On Monday, we had, you know, hired someone through a company who came in to clean our house, and instead they just helped themselves to a lot of jewelry in my drawer. Yeah.
No.
Yes, 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 yes.
Oh,
Um, which is, very traumatic,
yes,
not because of the stuff that was taken, but because of the memories that are attached to it. And I
definitely.
have to say, I'm not mourning the things that were taken. I don't feel that that to me was so important. I am missing the feeling of that thing brought with it, right? The memories, which I realize I still get to keep, regardless of whether the stuff is there or not. But that is to say, I feel fairly, I mean, it's a terrible situation, but I don't feel so oppressed by the stuff that was taken. Um, so I'm not like a possession person, uh, is my general orientation. Like things are not that important to me, but
But
what,
it's still such a abuse of trust. It's shocking,
yes,
yeah. I mean, I
yes.
remember we had a burglary case in Switzerland actually a number of
Uh-huh.
years ago when I lived there with my family and our kids were still young. And it happened in the afternoon. I just drove to school to pick them up and I came home 20 minutes later and all the old jewelry was gone. And and
Wow.
just the fact that people were in the house
Yes,
was of
that's
course
what feels.
horrible. and
Mhm.
they took, you know, beautiful things, but the I was the saddest about the old things that I inherited from my aunt and grandmother and so on. So yeah,
Yeah,
but oh, I'm so
same.
sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's, I think like you, the things that we were upset about was, my husband's father passed away many years ago. My husband was only 15 years old. And he's very few things from his father. And one of those is like a chain that his dad used to wear. So they took that. So
Aw,
that's very sad because it's sort of like this last connection, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I
It's tough.
think it's really tough, but I think it was a reinforcement that it's not really about the object or the
The
possession. And so I guess,
material. Mm,
yeah. So I guess the possession I value the most is memories and feelings and sentiments.
yeah, yeah, I agree. What is your greatest fear?
Oh my God. What is my greatest fear among the many? Um, I honestly, I think that probably it would be not having a close relationship with my child. I think that that would break my heart, not being able to sort of, she talks to me a lot about things that are happening to her. I think if that went away, I would feel very, very disappointed um, with myself and with life in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
Um, so that's about it. I've never been afraid of like losing a job or other things like that. It's totally about my relationship with um, my family and especially with my daughter because, I sort of brought this person into the world.
Yeah,
So
of
I want
course.
to take care of
Yeah,
her. Mm,
it's your child.
yeah.
Um, if you were to be reborn, what would you come back as?
Oh my God. That's a great question. I think I'd want to come back as like a phenomenal opera singer. I want to have,
Ah!
yeah, something very fun, like just an amazing, perfectly pitched voice and to be on a great stage singing beautiful arias or it would be phenomenal. I want to come back with a beautiful singing voice, maybe a bird, something that sings beautifully.
Well, I make sure I'll be there to see you and listen to you.
Thank you.
So we go back to 2011. And
Mhm.
at the time, you were the first chief diversity officer for New York State.
Yes.
Amazing. And yeah, what happened then?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I want to take a couple of steps back to the months leading up to that
Mhm.
decision. I was working at a private corporation, Toyota, which is a very well-known and regarded company, but I was feeling a little stuck and a little bit like I wasn't in charge of my own destiny. Um,
Mhm.
and so I started to have conversations with some mentors, a lot of women, about sort of that feeling and that sentiment. And one of them recommended that I speak to the then governor-elect's sort of search committee as they were looking for jobs and people to fill some of the positions that the administration required. And I did come headfirst in newsroom. It was like the first moment when I realized that um, a lot of what sort of shapes your decisions in life is outside of who you are, but also in control. But you're also in control of sort of those conversations
Mhm.
and taking those steps. So, I started sort of the interview process and the conversations, just wanting to kind of become unstuck from what I felt was like not a terribly inspiring or fulfilling career situation, and then very quickly found myself having very serious conversations about this role to become the first chief diversity officer for the state of New York. And the irony of all of this is that, you know, I was kind of like in this situation where not very much was happening. And then 2 months later, I found myself pregnant. I found myself having this offer of the first chief
2 months
diversity
after you
officer.
started the job.
No, actually 2 months after I started the process of searching for a new job, I found myself with sort of all of the things that I wanted, that I didn't want to have it happen at the same time, but nonetheless all came at the same time, right?
Yeah, like usual.
Like usual, exactly. And so it was interesting because it happened so quickly. I kind of barely had time to think about it because, you know, we had to make the announcement very quickly. I had to let folks at the job know very quickly. The moment I decided to say yes to the governor's job, 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant. So it was just happening very quickly. And I think, to your point, then, you know, January 2nd of 2011 came around. I was sort of into this job. I'm stepping into, you know, the first meeting of the governor's cabinet, and we're sitting around this table, and he's at the head of the table, and I'm there with some other folks who had also been appointed. And I remember just feeling like, oh my God, it's like not a dream. It's actually happening right now. I'm sitting here and what am I meant to do? Right? Which is
Yeah.
not to say that, you know, I think as women, we over prepare. Like I had prepared a plan. I knew exactly the thing that we wanted to tackle and what I wanted to do. It wasn't about that. It was more of like, you know, the sense of like, oh my gosh, I have to start the work now. And where do I start? And how do I get started? Is it going to work out? Am I going to do a good job? Am I going to work hard enough? And, you know, sort of all the questions that jump into your head.
Questions
When
and
you're at
doubts,
home.
right?
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
Mm.
You know, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being the first anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and so I was just very conscious of the fact that if I mess this up, this thing could fall apart and it could not have a good reputation moving forward. I had a responsibility to do it well, to make sure that there was somebody else after. I had a responsibility as a woman, because I was the first and a woman, to make sure that I represented, you know, women well. So it just felt like a lot of pressure.
Mm.
And with that comes sort of doubt about whether you can do it, because it's, you know, not just because it's a big scale, or even just because, you know, sort of you're the first in it, but because you are taking it seriously, right?
Yeah.
And if you're taking the opportunity seriously, and if you want to deliver something meaningful and transformative, then, you know, you should have a little bit of doubt that maybe, you
Mm-hmm.
know, um, you could mess it up, because it's the only way to keep yourself honest about how hard you have to work
Mm-hmm.
and how um, much it matters
Mm-hmm.
to you and
Yeah.
everyone else.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And then you basically um, prepared the way for many to follow in this field while you were then pregnant.
Yes. So I found out that I was pregnant and didn't. I really, you know, the thing that happens, and let's not assume that all the people who are listening necessarily have gone through this experience, but the thing that happens is you get pregnant and you're kind of like 3 weeks into it, and you really don't usually tell people about it because so many things can happen in an early pregnancy. I was also, at the time 38, was fairly, old, I guess, but
Mm.
mature, right, in age. I think in the medical field at the time, they would call that a geriatric pregnancy because it's past 35, which is terrible. But anyway,
We have to work on that. Yeah.
yes, we do. But I was, sort of a little older and, sort of very early stages, you sort of all of the sense that, so many things can happen at that early stage. So I'm also carrying sort of like this quote unquote secret because you really want to wait till a time when the pregnancy seems viable and that everything is okay, lest something happen, right? And so I was sort of like, pregnant, not able to tell people. I had to go to the doctor constantly because of like my age and some other health factors. So I was balancing this like very demanding schedule, a fresh new administration with big plans, the job that I had like really navigated. And I remember, sort of like getting this assistant, and like literally the first conversation I have with her is like, over the next 3 days, I have to go to the doctor these many times. And she's like, but why? And I was like, I just need to take care of some stuff. Right. And, sort of like navigating, like, you're not available during these times, but it's like early stages of the administration. So you have to be available all of the time, and the sort of just the chaotic nature of what it's like to bring in a new administration of government. And it was just like all of these things coming at you. And, I'm sort of there trying to do that, trying to plan for sort of like big announcements, what your agenda is, but also trying to stay healthy and be present for everyone at the same time, right? Be
Huge.
present. It's huge. It was so much, right? Um, and, I had to find a new doctor because I just had a gynecologist, so I had to find an obstetrician. It was just like there were a lot of things going on, right? It was just a big tumultuous change. But, it's so interesting, and maybe it's like a thing that I feel a lot of and have experienced a lot of women do. We just do all of the things, right? Um, and in spite of sort of like the doubt that we may have and the sense that and the fear, I do find that like we take on all of the tasks, right?
Mhm. Yep.
And that's what I did. I just like took on all of the tasks one by one and tried not to be distracted by the totality of all the things that were happening, but to
Mm.
just focus on like, at this moment, I'm doing this piece, and then I'm going to leave here and do the next thing, and then I'm going to leave here and
One
do the
step at a
next thing,
time. Mm.
one
Mm.
step at a time. So it was hard 3 months into it. Then when I was finally able to say, okay, this is what's going on, then it felt a lot better.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
it was like, oh, okay, you're pregnant. That's why. Like you haven't been here for the last 2 hours,
Mhm.
right? So it was good. It definitely was, I think a lot of the doubt and the fear also came from like not being able to authentically be able to share all of the things that were happening with
Of
me. And
course.
then
Mm.
once I was able to balance that out a little bit better, it was great. And I remember that moment when I actually told our general counsel, her name's Mylan Dennerstein. She's no longer there. She's now at a law firm. But I walked into her office and I was like, Mylan, I have to share something with you. And I just want you to know, because we need to plan around it, but I'm pregnant. And she let out the most joyous shriek that I've
Ah,
ever heard any
oh,
person,
nice. Oh,
because
good.
she was so just like genuinely happy for me.
Oh.
And also the power and the difference of women being in positions of power and supporting each other,
Mm-hmm.
that she like just fully understood what that moment was about and was also like fully supportive,
Yeah.
which I think then made my sentiment about the whole thing different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
also helped me lean into the job as the person that I brought all of who I was in that moment to the job, right? And consequently just like loved my time as the first chief diversity officer for the state of New York,
Yeah.
in spite of all of the challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, you said that it did bring out the challenges of, a male dominated
Yeah.
work environment, and also I mean 2011, like 13 years ago, that's
Yeah.
a lot has happened in that time,
Yeah.
especially for women in the workplace. Of course, it's never enough, but I'm sure that must have been hard. And you, so I'm wondering. I mean, is there like a lessons that
Yeah.
you take away from this time, and why has this been, apart from being pregnant,
Mhm.
and being the first chief diversity officer, but what why has this been such a pivotal moment?
Yeah. I mean, I think back on that time, and like you said, so much has changed. I think that the expectations that were placed on sort of all of the folks in those leadership positions, which I'm sure have not necessarily shifted as much, but were probably even more egregious then. I remember that I was on the road a lot, which is like not a thing that pregnant woman manages very easily, right? But I
Hmm.
was grabbing the train early Monday morning from New York City, going to Albany, staying there Monday through Wednesday, and then coming back on Wednesday afternoon, and then going to work in the city Thursday and Friday. And then I would do that all over again throughout the entire time that I was pregnant, because I didn't take any time off before the baby came. And then after the baby came, I was doing the same thing, but I was also, breastfeeding my child, which made it even more complicated. And the thing that I think is interesting about that is that, like, all of those things are just barriers and obstacles that make
Hmm.
it more difficult for me to not only be a parent, but to also perform my job, right? I'm just managing
Right.
all of the logistics of all of
Yeah.
those things
Yeah. Yeah.
while the demand to produce is still the same, right? So
Mm.
that all those things were terribly difficult. I think the things that I learned, however, in spite of how difficult the situation was, one, that those things exist and we need to change them, of course. Um, Two, I really hadn't understood just exactly how tough I was, like how much physical, emotional, and intellectual strength I had as a human being. And I think that those things helped to amp up my ambition for myself,
Hmm.
because I then understood exactly how much more capacity I had than I had ever thought about myself, which is, kind of like not the best way to learn that
Yeah.
lesson.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's it's not the best way to learn that lesson, but always looking for silver linings. It's just my way of living life. I thought,
Hmm.
oh wow, I had underestimated myself so much, right? And
Hmm.
I'm actually quite capable of doing way more than I've been giving myself credit for. Um, so it wasn't the best way to learn that lesson, but I'm grateful for that lesson. And I think that it really changed the way in which I have approached my career since then. And then I think the other thing that I would say that I learned also from that experience is that, I had sort of thought that a career happened to you. Like
Mm-hmm.
things just sort of came up and would work out, and you'd get promoted, and then you'd like work really hard, and then someone would notice, and then you know, move up. And the thing that I learned from that entire experience from beginning to end is that I needed to be more in charge of my career trajectory, that I needed to put, you know, time and energy and vision,
Mm-hmm.
especially,
Mm-hmm.
to what I wanted to accomplish. And part of that vision, which goes back to our sort of your first question about uh, what does, you know, sort of happiness or joy look like for me. But part of that vision was that I needed to get to a place where I had balance across my career, my family life, right? And that vision of my career needed to include that. And that I needed to take the steps, to do that. And so I learned those things from that pivotal moment.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the, you know, all the hard work and all of the doubt was for me to be able to sort of like focus my talent and aspirations and opportunities that I found in my life to get to this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it is, I think, often the case that that women tend to underestimate themselves, and that's why so many women, you know, put so much effort into getting yet another degree and yet another qualification. And in the meantime, they could have already been earning money or, you know, having
Mhm.
influence and get on with it. I mean, with the work, with the real stuff.
Exactly.
So, in your field, diversity, equity, and inclusion, you stayed in that field after your position, right? For a number of companies.
Yes, more or less. I mean, I kind of ended up merging my two interests. So I had been doing philanthropy mostly, even up through that time that I went to Toyota, and working in the nonprofit sector. And then I started in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and continued that and went sort of into the corporate sector. And then have been lucky enough that for most of the roles that I've had in the private sector where I've done diversity, I've also been able to do some philanthropy or corporate responsibility together with it. And so most of the roles that I've had in the private sector have included both things.
Mhm.
But yes, still in DEI.
And what would you say has changed over the past 10, 12 years in DEI?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're traversing a very, you know, challenging moment for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mhm.
Right now, in the last couple of years or
Mm.
post George Floyd, I think there was sort of like an upswing in work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of energy, uh, some of it maybe not devoted to the most important things that companies could be doing in this space. And now there's been, you know, documented a little bit of a backlash against the field. So I think it is a moment that is requiring us as diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals to focus on what it is we want to change and how we accomplish it and deliver, you know, sort of deliver change and true impact for companies and organizations. Um, and, you know, some of it is also criticism that's not necessarily well deserved for the field, because it hasn't really had the kind of investment and time
Mm.
span to sort of mature and change things
Yeah, of
for the
course.
better. But I think at companies, and you know, there are so many reports about it at companies where diversity has been taken seriously and there has been a change at the board and leadership level. You do see a performance that is markedly different. I mean, McKinsey has been studying it for the last 12 years, and they have a lot of evidence to show for the fact that companies with higher diversity at the top typically perform in the top quartile when compared to other companies. So I do think that it is still an important field. It is just a challenging moment of us to pivot and focus on the things that are transformative for companies and organizations, and that will deliver lasting change and value for those companies. But I wholeheartedly still believe that it's something that we should be doing. And I really hope that the companies who believe in it will continue to invest in it and show through it why it matters.
Yeah, clearly. So what are your like top 3 goals, or what would you say is really most important, not only for you to do in your daily job, but also looking at talent that is behind you, that's coming up next? Because I would believe, especially in this field, yes, you are in the moment and you look forward, but you also want to take, of course, the talent that's behind you with you and guide them into a different future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I say is always the most important in this field of diversity, equity, and inclusion is to define what about a diverse and inclusive workplace matters for the place that you're at, right? So in other words, it's if I work at a music company or at a media entertainment company, I want to think about diverse storytelling and how we impact, that business through growing audiences and telling more diverse stories for success. Versus if I work at a legal firm, do I want to think about sort of how the talent moves through the organization to become, sort of a partner in the firm, and what are the fields, of the legal business that might, facilitate that. So one of the, I think, really important things to me in diversity, equity, and inclusion as a professional is to be adaptive to the needs of the organization you're working for. And I think that that is advice that lends itself to every kind of field that you work in, right? Like the way in which you as a professional have impact and add value is in a way that is bespoke for the organization, the field, the industry, and the company at which you work. So to me, that's table stakes. Like, you have to figure out how to do that for your company in a unique way, and in a way that matters to the culture of that place and the bottom line of that company. I think for people coming up behind, not just in the diversity, equity, and inclusion field, I would say just as a professional in general, the things that are important for us that I always think are important to understand is that we work we work with people. And so it's really important for us to be human beings, to understand the people that we work with, to respect the ideas of other people that we work with, and to collaborate with them and to engage with them, not just for your own career advancement, but because there's like genuine, right, value in doing that, in understanding other people's experiences and what talents they bring in order to move organizations forward. So the advice I always give to the folks that I mentor is really about like not just focusing on your own advancement, right? Also focus on getting to know the people in your organization, in your life, that are also contributing important, wonderful, interesting things, because those will enrich your life, they'll enrich your experience, and they will make you a better leader, right? So I think, to me, that's really important, to just be human and try to connect with people and be genuine about those connections, not just using them because you think it may help advance your career, which I think is like a very apropos thing for a DEI person to say, because it's really about like, forward that ethos of inclusion and wanting to get to know people.
Mhm.
And I mean, and I think the last thing I would say is, and you kind of talked about that point, is that, you know, it's not all about like the inputs that, you know, sort of like, I'm going to learn this thing, I'm going to study this thing, I'm going to be, you know, it's not just about the inputs of like how you become better. It's also about the output, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
how are you focusing on, you know, what you're delivering for your company and other folks, right? Um, and the well-being of your organization and the
Mhm.
well-being of the people that surround you. So many times I meet folks who will say, I don't understand why I haven't been promoted. I did this project. I did the I did this thing, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I always ask, well, how did that change the life of your team? How did it make that project more impactful for the company? Like, what is the output? It's not just about what you're putting in, but what is the output?
Yeah. Yeah. So you seem pretty zen to me. What is your secret? Like, how do you relax?
I mean, I work out
Hmm.
um, fairly regularly, not in like an intense way, although I used to, you know, play sports competitively as a child. So I think that kind of like orients your brain in a certain
What
way
did you
towards
do?
stress of work. I used to play tennis.
Ah.
Um, and, you know, it's a very individual sport. So you have to learn a lot about what you can control and what you can't control. And usually the only thing you can control is yourself, and most of the other things you can't control the wind, you
Yeah.
can't really control the surface, your opponent, or any of those things. So I learned a lot about like what I can manage and what other folks can't manage. But I do that. I have this like little trick, which it's pretty soon not going to work anymore because my daughter's turning 12. But usually when I come home from work, we have like a little time together. I'm not a ticklish person. Um, but my daughter is very ticklish. So one of the things that I like to do to kind of like be present in the moment is to tickle her, because it's the only way that I get to laugh through tickling. Um, so, you know, sort of like taking the time to find those moments where I could just be present in a way that's like very genuine. The other thing is like I learned from one of my mentors a really long time ago. I think mentors are good for helping to reorient your brain. But one of my mentors, he's a man actually, is very fond of saying, you know, we are human beings, and by that fact, imperfect. So just realize that you go every day, you walk on earth as an imperfect thing.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it takes a lot of pressure off. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. It sounds so simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
advice. And what energizes you?
A good song. I love to go salsa dancing. I feel like I don't do that enough, but that
Hmm.
energizes me. Um, I'm also energized by complicated, complex things that involve a lot of people. um, I like hanging out with people and understanding their thinking and solving complex problems together with them, especially when they don't see it the way I see it. I want to sort of like, you know, close that chasm and get to like their point of view,
Hmm.
to see the world in a different way. I'm like really animated by just like being thrown into a sea of uncertainty and trying to figure out with other people how we, you know, get to the other side. I love that.
Ah, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, I thank you so much for sharing your story on my podcast Shift Happens, and that was really really insightful. And I do believe that this, as you called it, the imposter syndrome and the doubting is still something we, especially as women, still need to work on a lot. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems almost innate, and maybe it's just, how we've been socialized, for hundreds and hundreds of years almost, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, great,
Yeah.
great topic, great story.
I wonder too if sometimes I think about it as, are we just as women being honest about the, fallibility of the things that we're doing, and men are just more accustomed to not speaking about it, and we're just more accustomed to talking about it. But for whatever reason, I do think that we're very much in touch with this sense of doubt about our own, and supported by evidence as well. Doubt about our ability to do things that we're perfectly qualified, sometimes more than qualified, to do. But if I could say the thing for me that I think is really important,
Mhm.
and I say this sometimes, is that, that doubt and or that fear, I do think it's important to acknowledge that feeling and those sentiments, but it's equally important to realize that it's just a feeling. It is not like a logical expression of reasons for why you shouldn't do things.
Yeah.
And so if you acknowledge the fear, recognize it's a feeling and a sentiment, but you continue with, sort of like the knowledge that you have the skill set and the experience to be an imperfect human in that situation,
Yep.
go forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a very nice closing sentence and comment. So I thank you so much. And that
Thank
was a
you.
very enriching conversation.